Hello and welcome to the Catholic Passage Podcast. My name is Neil Flattery and I'm today's host. This podcast aims to pursue the truth in authentic Catholic life, a deep integration of faith and reason in a joyful community of families, raising the next generation of the Catholic faithful. Today's guest is Brian McClain. He's a pastoral associate and he works closely with the students and young people of St. Edmund Catholic Schools and Holy Trinity Parish in Fort Dodge, Iowa, where I'm located. He's also a father of 5, and I'm really excited to share our conversation where Brian discusses how he got involved with youth ministry and his approaches to presenting the faith to young people, his work with the altar servers of the parish in particularly where he's doing a great job, and so much more. We hope you enjoy our conversation and that it might bless you in some way. All right, Brian. Well, thanks for joining us today on the Catholic Passage Podcast. So I really wanted to kind of get you on our podcast because I've been kind of viewing you, at our parish and from afar a little bit. And I've noticed that you've been getting a lot more involved in like youth ministry and especially at the school and at the parish and especially with the altar servers and what you're doing there. And so if you could kind of just give our listeners kind of a little bit of a background of what your background is, your family, how you came to Fort Dodge, just
Sure.
to kind of give everyone a little bit of background of who you are and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife, Samantha, and I have 6 children, and we've lived in Fort Dodge now for about 23 years. Neither of us are native to Fort Dodge. Samantha grew up in Jefferson, south of Fort Dodge, about 45 miles. And I'm actually from Dubuque, but we met in Cedar Falls. And when we got married, we decided that whoever got the first kind of big person job, the real grown-up job, that's where we would call home. And so Samantha had been a student athlete at Iowa Central and then went on to UNI, which is what took her to Cedar Falls. So when Iowa Central called asking if she'd be interested in working in the recruiting department, we said sure. And so we packed up our, what little belongings you have as a newlywed couple, and we moved to Fort Dodge. So little known fact, the first time I'd ever been to Fort Dodge in my life was the day I moved here.
Really?
I was very familiar with it. Growing up on the eastern part of the state, if you need anything outside of maybe going to Des Moines for a state tournament event or something, you would either go to the Quad Cities or Madison or Chicago, which is, just 2.5, 3 hours away. So there wasn't a lot of reason for me to come out to the central part of Iowa. So I just had never been. I wasn't familiar with it. I had no preconceived notions one way or the other. It just wasn't really even on our radar. But Samantha being from the area and having attended school here, she thought it'd be a good move for us. And so we've been here ever since. So when we first came to town, I did some work at the youth shelter in Fort Dodge and was really passionate about working with kids. And that job led me to about 6 or 7 years working as a substance abuse counselor and at-risk student services worker at Fort Dodge Senior High, which then led into me being the juvenile court officer, which is like a state position. So I was the juvenile court officer for about a dozen years for Webster County and our neighboring Pocahontas County. And throughout that time, I still kind of felt a calling back to working with kids in a different, there just was something missing. I don't know if it was the medium. When you're a probation officer, it's just a lot of, order and structure, a lot of just, scheduled meetings and just, you can kind of, there's not a lot of organic conversation that can come out of it. So I always kind of felt this pull back into the school, even though I enjoyed working with Fort Dodge kids tremendously as a probation officer. So a couple of years ago, after some prayerful consideration and talking with Samantha, I decided to leave that career and come and work for the church and school. So Monsignor and Father Ross at the time we had neither a youth minister in the school or in the parish at the time. So they kind of combined those roles into a kind of a hybrid position. They call it pastoral associate, but I think that's just Nobody exactly knows what that means. I think a pastoral associate looks different depending on what community you're in.
Yeah.
So that's my job. I've been here now in the school. Absolutely love it. I get to spend all day long with other people's kids, my own children in some cases, because I still have kids in the system. And then, like you mentioned earlier, I also have an opportunity to do some stuff on the church side, which I really, really enjoy too. One of those projects that I enjoy, and it fits naturally with working in the school, is I've kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, given some leadership to helping with the altar server kids, mostly because I know them all, because there are a lot of them that serve are in the school during the day, so I can encourage them and try to kind of push them a little bit to reconsider getting back involved with the program. Some of them have kind of fallen away as they gotten older. So it just seemed like a natural fit for me to help recruit kids, train them, and maybe encourage kids that, I don't know if they didn't have a good experience, it's not the right word, but maybe just kind of thought they'd outgrown it, but maybe hadn't been looking at it necessarily through the right lens, to try to get some of those students back involved. So that's, that's kind of in a nutshell.
Okay.
What my
I definitely want to touch on all those aspects, especially like you're working as a pastoral associate in the schools and what you're doing at the altar service too in particular. But just backing up a little bit, like you said, you grew up in Dubuque, and I know Dubuque is kind of like, as far as Iowa goes, it's a pretty Catholic area.
Very much so.
More so than Fort Dodge particularly. But did you grow up in kind of a Catholic household? And
I did. I grew up
Mass every Sunday and that sort of stuff.
I did. And I have very faithful parents. But I would not say that was hugely formative for me necessarily, because I was somewhat of a rebellious child. So I had all the formation opportunities, but I wouldn't say that it gave me a foundation to come back to, no doubt about that. But at the time I would say, and that it's kind of a whole long different story about my own reversion experience. But I went to a small Catholic school in East Dubuque. So technically my parents lived in Illinois, which is on the other side of the Mississippi.
Okay.
So I went to a small elementary rural school where we had 19 kids in my class, and we just moved one door down each year until we were in 8th grade. And then we had a choice. We could either go to the public high school in East Dubuque, or we could, our parish belonged to like a conglomerate that allowed us to go to Wahlert Catholic High School in Dubuque. Okay. So then I went to St. Mary's in East Dubuque from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then I went from a class of 19 to a class of 300 at Wahlert as a 9th grader. So, I finished my 9 through 12 as a Dubuque Wahlert High School student. So. Okay.
Well, don't they say that the thing about East Dubuque is the bars are open till 3 a.m. or something?
Yeah. So it's really funny. So because it's in Illinois, the bars stayed open till 3:30. So growing up, I would see that all the headlights coming across at 2:00 when the bars closed in Iowa, because they would come across the Julian Dubuque Bridge. Okay. Because they could stay till 3:30, and then at 3:30 you'd see all the taillights going back across the bridge because the casino in Dubuque was open 24 hours. So there's kind of this constant back and forth in the late night hours. But
that's funny. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So I know I'm always kind of jealous of. I knew a lot of people in Dubuque County when I lived or went to school at Iowa, and it was like they got the small town baseball league, and it's like the communities are very close knit around there too, at least a small town. Right. My parents grew up in didn't grow up in Dyersville. They moved to Dyersville for a little bit out when they got out of college, and so it's like that those communities are pretty close together, and they have they're pretty intact communities and that sort of stuff.
They are, and like you said, it's predominantly a Catholic community as far as Dubuque is concerned. I didn't know any else. I thought every place was like that growing up. I think when I was growing up there were like 10 neighborhood churches. So everybody had their own little elementary, Resurrection or Nativity or St. Joseph. So, and then they all kind of converged on Wahlert as upperclassmen. So I just thought everywhere you went, the vast majority of people were Catholic. So that was somewhat new to me.
Yeah.
I think I remember maybe a handful of kids when I was going to school that weren't Catholic. Ironically, back then they didn't make them attend mass at Wahlert, which I'm sure has changed. But the only reason I even knew they weren't Catholic is because they got to sit in the lunchroom during all school mass instead of participating.
Interesting.
But I just assumed everybody was Catholic because it was kind of what I grew up with, and so
right. Yeah, it's kind of unique nowadays to see like that type of area that is still like predominantly one type of religion now. I mean, Fort Dodge, it's just kind of a melting pot of different.
And my dad still lives there, so they still have a strong Catholic presence, but they're suffering from some of the same restructuring that we've gone through here in our diocese, where they're sharing resources and merging and things like that. So
for sure. Well, now kind of let's flipping gears to kind of what you're doing now with youth ministry and especially at the school. When you kind of, what does your day-to-day look like when as a youth minister at the school? Are you meeting with students in their office? Are they coming in to you for guidance and that sort of stuff? Are you leading like Bible studies or something like that?
That's a great question. Students off camera here that are raising their eyebrows they asked me the same question. They think I have what's called the easiest job in the world. Campus ministry and youth ministry, at least the way I've envisioned it, it's hard sometimes for people to see it in the school setting because it doesn't look like a traditional classroom. And it probably shouldn't really, right? Because in some ways we have a lot of freedom because we're not expected to deliver course content and follow rubrics and things like that. So the conversations look a little bit different. The environment looks a little bit different. We try to provide a relaxed environment where kids feel comfortable visiting. And frankly, it's optional. So a lot of kids that need or want or have a desire to have these types of conversations, they may not necessarily initially feel comfortable seeking it out. So you have to provide reasons for kids to stop by. So campus ministry here at St. Edmund's, as far as my room is concerned, has become quite notorious for the snacks, probably to the chagrin of the custodians about the snack wrappers around. But I just feel like throughout our culture, but just in general, with kids in general, having children of my own, sometimes snacks and food are a common language that we all kind of speak.
For sure.
And I know there's been many kids that have stopped by here who I suspect probably didn't need a snack, but they needed a reason to stop in and say hi or visit or see if this was kind of a place for them.
Yeah.
So, well, I'll just, if you're okay with it, I'm going to change. Well, I better not. I got a couple students off. So I don't have permission from their parents to necessarily have them on camera. We created an environment here where we have, bean bags and couches from my old living room furniture and tables for kids to study at and a conference table. So it doesn't look like a traditional classroom, but it's big enough to have like a small group discussion, but also enough that you can accomplish, tasks.
That's what I think. I always, and you would have a lot more experience than me, but it's like when trying to like pass on the faith to the next generation and to try to, it doesn't necessarily have to be young people, but passing on the faith to anyone, it's like there isn't really a one size fits all approach that works for everyone.
Right.
And it's like some people are maybe looking for like more of an intellectual foundation in the faith. Some people want to have, more of someone they can talk to, more of an emotional attachment.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so like it's hard to find like a youth ministry effort that works for everyone. And so it's probably like from your side, you probably have to wear a lot of different hats and try to, approach it in different ways with different kids.
I'm really fortunate in that almost all the jobs I've had prior to this one have led me up to the skills to, and I'm not trying to be boastful, but there's very few things as a probation officer that you don't have to tackle in terms of just difficult discussions.
Yeah.
And so if you do that job long enough or work with other people in the human service type field long enough, there's very few topics that are off limits. And that's a gift because, like you said, every kid that comes into campus ministry, they're coming in at a different entry point. And so you have to be able to have those conversations individually, but also facilitate like an environment where everybody feels welcome. So for example, last class period, one of the expectations in the room is I have no problem providing snacks and food for everyone, but they have to contribute something to the environment. So, and usually I make them answer some sort of question, some sort of probing philosophical question. Father Jake or I come up with one. But I spun it on them today, and I said, today's task, if you want to eat a snack from my snack cupboard, is you have to pose a question to myself or your peers, some sort of probing question that we're all going to be better for having answered. So you get everything from would you rather, spend eternity in Antarctica or
right.
or the desert to one of the most enlightening questions that came up was, why would God create us just to leave us all here on this planet to suffer? Now, I understand there's some problems with that premise, but that's where the kids were at with their understanding of why God created mankind. So you have to kind of meet them there, and that's where. So the discussion, can range from, homecoming decorations to what's the whole purpose of this whole thing, and if God loves us. Another common one here we've had recently that's been coming up a lot is free will. If God knows and is omnipotent and omnipresent and knows what we're going to do we really have free will?
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about the difference between God knowing what's going to happen and intervening or controlling what's going to happen. And these are just, frankly, they're just discussions that come up by virtue of organic conversations. And sometimes they're super fruitful, and sometimes I scratch my head and I'm like, I'm no smarter from having that conversation.
Right.
That's for sure.
Well, I think that's what's so important for what you do, is because I think it's easy for us, like in 2025, to just like never think about these questions. Never think about these, never like dive into these deeper issues, because we're constantly like distracted by what we're doing at work or school and on our phones and Netflix and all this sort of stuff, that like we never give our times to like actually delve into these deeper topics. And so like having that place at the school for them to, you're kind of prodding these kids to maybe think a little deeper. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's fun. It's always interesting to see where people are coming from and what their understanding is. I always learn something new all the time. One of the things I learn the most often is that I have some presumptions about what kids think or know that are typically off, that they may think quite a bit differently about something, or they may either deep or may something I think is important to them may not be. Other things that I think would be trivial and kind of resolved already are very important to them. And so I learn all the time not to presume, what kids know and understand, or B, that it's important to them,
Yeah, that's interesting. Like as far as like trying to reach this next generation, I should say, what are some of like these, can you look back and see like any successes you've had in particular, and any struggles that you've had?
For sure. I honestly, I think sometimes we can get really data driven and critical about the numbers. And I understand that we have to keep numbers for different reasons, but I think my experience has been, I don't mean this about me personally, but maybe just campus ministry and some of the things we're doing in the school and church in general with young people, is that I think it's mostly successes. It may not equate, the measurement may not be the same as you and I are. Hopefully my goal would be to see all these young people in church on the weekend and practicing their faith and living out the gospel. And maybe someday that will, but I may not be around to see that.
Right.
But what I do see all the time is kids feeling more and more comfortable about talking about things that are hurting them or that are causing them distress. They feel comfortable visiting with the clergy and asking questions and asking for deeper understanding. They're open to have civil discussions with one another about things. Rarely, if ever, have I seen anybody mistreat somebody in here because of their opinion or position or knowledge or lack of knowledge about something. They do a really good job of, meeting each other where they're at and talking about things, even on some really difficult topics sometimes.
Yeah,
Because
that's awesome.
just like in the rest of the world, some of the topics that kids talk about that get the most energy and traction are hot button topics that we all talk about in society too, whether it be human sexuality and dignity, whether it be rights and current affairs in the government. So just because they're young people doesn't mean they don't have a take on that too. So sometimes it'd be easy for it to digress into an argument, but they do a really good job of respecting one another and talking through things. So
that's awesome.
And from a Catholic perspective, sometimes, at the end of the day, when Father Jake and previous Father Jake, Father Ross was here, we always tried to kind of summarize it from the Catholic worldview. So I understand what you're saying, and then we would always try to pose a question. So, and I think, not to get too deeply philosophical here, but some of these young people are kind of, I would say they're kind of enamored by the idea of like moral relativism, because then it doesn't hurt anybody or offend anybody. Like if it doesn't really affect me, what difference does it make?
Right.
So I will say that the one time I try to challenge kids on their position is that one. Everything has an effect, and so we talk often about the Catholic worldview and whether or not we're obligated to preach the gospel and stand up for the truth, even if it doesn't directly affect us. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably a good one to push back on too. If they're starting from a moral relativist point of view, then it's kind of hard to even go anywhere from there.
And it's not always.
Right.
It's interesting. As I listen to the discussion, there are topics where they're not morally relativistic about it, but there are others where it doesn't appear to have hit home in a particular way, and so it's kind of the position, well, I'll just ride the fence on this one.
Yeah.
And I think that's normal when you're young and you're concerned about your self-image and being offensive, and you just don't have a lot of world experience yet,
Right.
So sometimes we try to talk about different, okay, so that hasn't particularly happened to you necessarily, but in this scenario, would you still be able to, or is it still morally right to remain neutral? So we try to give them situations in which they can think through that with the Catholic worldview, even though they haven't maybe personally gone through it. So lots of great discussions come from that.
Yeah. So now, kind of, I wanted to touch on a little bit like the work you're doing at the altar servers, because I've noticed like it's had a big impact, I think, just on making our liturgies more reverent. And, these altar servers are up there and they know what they're doing around the altar, and they're where they're supposed to be. They're not goofing around and that sort of stuff. And I think that's had a big impact, like I said, on the state of our liturgies and that sort of stuff. And what kind of prompted you to get involved in that area? Was it kind of just Monsignor kind of pushing you to it, or one of the priests?
If I can be completely frank with you, I was just thinking about this last night because I wondered if it would come up, and I'm not really sure what the catalyst was for it. I'm not sure how I got involved in it. I'm not sure if when I started here as the pastoral associate, if I just started like altar serving with the kids during the school mass, and if it grew from that. I really don't remember the start.
Yeah.
I just remember at some point, Deacon Jeff Stonick also has a passion for liturgy and altar serving in particular, and he wanted to kind of take that project under his wings and come up with like a formal structure for it. And so it seemed again like a natural fit, since I'm in the school every day and have access to maybe meeting with religion classes and or groups of kids that wanted to be trained, that it just seemed like a natural fit that I would be able to help with that. And I really do enjoy it. I don't want you to think that it's a burden. I really do enjoy it, but it just seemed natural that when it came time for the 4th or 5th graders to get trained, that would be something we could work kind of seamlessly into the religion curriculum and during the school day.
For sure.
Since families are just so busy already, that I think it just kind of fell into my lap. And I think because it's been fairly successful and kids have started showing a renewed interest in doing it, it just kind of stuck.
Yeah.
So,
have you seen any impact on as the kids are getting more spending time around the altar and having that like closeness to Christ at the altar? that it's impacting kind of like their spiritual life at all or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I think so. And one of the ways I think I see it the most is when you really truly appreciate what's happening at the altar and what you're able to be a part of in a particular and unique way. I've seen I think I mentioned this earlier, but an increase in kids who used to serve that don't any longer, that have asked if they can.
You've kind of made it look cool up there. I mean, you're making it look like it's something like that you want, that kids would be maybe want to do themselves.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing for me is that it really is an honor. I mean, I know when you're young, it seems like an obligation, but it really is an honor. There's some things that the altar servers get to do that nobody else in the congregation ever gets to do, like handling some of the sacred vessels and other things like that. It really is, I mean, when done properly, it's an honor to be able to be up there, you know? And so I think when it's done well, the liturgy looks better and is better. And I think when people see things done well and they see that people notice that, they think, I'd kind of like to be a part of that.
Right. Know? Yeah.
Their parents or grandparents say, well, how come you're not up there, you know?
For sure.
And so I think when they have a little bit of confidence and when they enjoy what they're doing, and we do try to have a little bit of fun too. So when we do those things, I think it's caused an increase in participation. So,
well, cool. Well,
but I do, on a spiritual level, I think it's really interesting. So we had a situation recently where one of our altar servers, for whatever reason, didn't consume the host immediately after receiving it. And one of the other altar servers, you know, in a charitable way, confronted him and said, hey, this is important. You need to consume that, you know. So they even recognized at a young age in middle school that there was a certain level of reverence necessary there. And so they took it upon themselves, which would be hard to do as a 6th or 7th grader.
Yeah, for sure.
And then they let me know afterwards, hey, that's kind of a big deal. So I said to so-and-so that they need to make sure they consume that and not be just holding on to it. So I said, you're absolutely right. It's really good that you recognize that and you were comfortable saying it to them, you know? So.
Well, like I said, I think everyone in attendance, and that's one thing too, when we notice like, you know, these 5th and 6th grade kids who are up there, like with a lot of like rigor and precision of what they're doing and they're taking it seriously, I think it impacts everyone in the congregation too. And it, you know, it's like, well, if that 5th grader is being reverent, then I need to step up my game a little bit too.
You know, it was a couple tiny tweaks so what we did is and this really, honestly, it's a larger conversation about the liturgy in general. But the altar server was the entry level point where we started at. But ideally, it would be lectors and EMHCs and everyone, sacristans. We tried to make sure that everybody understood what was happening, and so they could like perform at the highest level of reverence. And so one of the things we did is we trained the kids that whenever they're in a group of 2 or 3, hopefully rarely they're just by themselves, but if a full team's there, which we call 3 altar servers, they always stay together and move as a group. And it sounds like a little thing, but if you have all 3 moving in unison and synchronization, as opposed to one running back and forth to the credence table or going in a different direction, it's really much less distracting. And although it's a little thing, it makes it seem so much more reverent and organized. And then the other thing we started doing is before we go out for Mass, we all talk about who's going to do what job during the Mass. Mm-hmm. And that way we're not trying to figure that out at the credence table or on the sides. And that way the congregation doesn't see a bunch of young people up there whispering and talking to each other like they're having a football huddle.
Right.
So they're very small things that it's nothing that I'm doing in particular. It's just helping them identify their jobs prior to going out and doing it in an effective way. And the end result is that it just really looks really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're about at half an hour here, Brian. Is there anything that you think that we still need to touch on, or you think I'm missing, or anything you want to add before we kind of close off here?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, this has been great. I appreciate you, taking the time out of your busy schedule to kind of make this work.
You bet.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Catholic Passage Podcast, and we hope that it blesses you. Please check out our show notes for a reflection takeaway, as well as more info on the Catholic Passage. We aim to support parents and educators as they pass on the Catholic faith and way of life to their children and students. To find out more about what we offer or how you might collaborate with us or support us in some way, please visit us at catholicpassage.com. Most importantly, you can support us through your prayers. We'll be praying for you. Please pray for us.